The autumn sun hung low over Mogollon Rim in 1945, casting long shadows across the weathered porch where an old man sat in his rocking chair. Caleb Stone was 75 years old now, his beard more silver than black, his hands gnarled like the ancient pines that surrounded his cabin. But his eyes remained sharp, the color of winter steel, and when he looked at his grandson, there was something in that gaze that made the boy sit up straighter. Michael was 12, all elbows and curiosity, and he had been asking questions all afternoon. Questions about why his grandfather lived alone up here in the mountains, so far from town, so far from everyone. Questions about the dream catcher that hung above the cabin door, its leather worn smooth by decades of wind and rain. Caleb let the silence stretch between them, the way a man does when he is deciding whether to open a door that has been closed for a very long time. Then he spoke, his voice low and deliberate, each word carrying the weight of years. Michael, there are stories a man only tells when he is old enough to understand that truth matters more than pride. This is a story about a woman who taught me how to live again after I thought I was already dead, and about a monster in a uniform who nearly killed us both. The boy leaned forward, his eyes wide. Caleb's gaze drifted to the mountains, to the distant ridges where the aspens were turning gold. In 1879, I was ready to die alone on this mountain. Then one morning, a woman came running to my door, barefoot, bleeding from her shoulder, terror in her eyes, and everything changed. He paused, letting the words settle. Her name was Tala. She was Apache, and she was running for her life. The wind moved through the pines, a sound like breathing, and Caleb Stone began to tell the story of the autumn that had defined his life. September 1879. Mogollon Rim, Arizona Territory. Caleb Stone was 48 years old and had been living like a dead man for 9 years. His cabin sat deep in the mountains, 15 miles from the nearest town, hidden among the ponderosa pines where the elk came to drink at mountain springs. It was a small structure, built from logs he had cut and notched himself, the walls 6 inches thick, chinked with moss to keep out the winter cold. The roof was steep to shed snow, the chimney made from stacked granite pulled from the mountainside. Inside, the cabin was sparse, a bed frame of rough-hewn pine, a table where he ate his meals alone, a stone fireplace that had kept him warm through 9 winters of solitude. On one wall, a shelf held 20 books, their spines cracked from reading by candlelight. Shakespeare, the Bible, Emerson's essays. On another wall hung his weapons, a Winchester Model 1873 rifle, a Colt Peacemaker revolver, a Bowie knife with a blade 10 inches long. And above the door, catching the morning light, hung a dream catcher made by Apache hands. Every day was the same. Caleb woke at 5 in the morning when the sky was still dark and the stars were sharp as ice. He checked his traps, 6 snare traps for squirrels, 3 deadfalls for rabbits. He hunted when the traps came up empty, moving through the forest like a shadow, the Winchester always in his hands. He read by the fire at night, the words of men long dead keeping him company in the silence. He spoke to no one. The people in Crimson Bluff, the town 15 miles south, called him the ghost of Mogollon. They said he ate human flesh. They said he could turn into a wolf. They said he had made a pact with the spirits of the mountain and that any man who ventured too close to his cabin would never be seen again. The truth was simpler and sadder. Caleb Stone was just a man who had lost everything and chose to live among the memories. 9 years earlier, in 1870, Caleb had been an Army scout, earning $30 a month, tracking Apache raiders and guiding cavalry patrols through the territory. He had been good at the work, better than most, because he respected the land and the people who knew it best. His wife, Emma, and their son, Daniel, lived in a cabin in Verde Valley, 50 miles to the south. Daniel was 6 years old with his mother's blonde hair and his father's quiet way of watching the world. In March of 1870, Caleb had gone on a long patrol, tracking a band of raiders who had stolen horses from a ranch near Prescott. The patrol lasted 10 weeks, pushing deep into the Superstition Mountains, sleeping cold under the stars, drinking muddy water from desert springs. When they finally returned, Caleb rode hard for home, eager to see his family, to hold his son, to sleep in his own bed. He smelled the smoke before he saw the cabin. The structure had burned to the ground, leaving only blackened timbers and ash. In the yard, two graves had been dug, marked with rough wooden crosses. Emma and Daniel had died of smallpox. The disease had swept through Verde Valley while Caleb was gone, killing 12 people in 3 weeks. The local Apache band, led by a war chief named Dakota, had found Emma and Daniel in the final hours of their illness. They had given them water, tried to ease their suffering, and when death came, they had wrapped the bodies in blankets and buried them with dignity. Dakota himself had come to find Caleb. The war chief was a tall man with gray streaks in his long black hair, his face lined with the history of hard years. He spoke broken English, but his meaning was clear. "Your woman and boy not die alone," Dakota had said, standing beside the graves. "My people stay with them. Give water. Sing death songs. They rest good now." Caleb had dropped to his knees in the ash and wept. The first and last time he would cry in front of another man. Before Dakota left, he had given Caleb a dream catcher, woven from willow branches and sinew, decorated with eagle feathers. "I have 2 daughters," the war chief said. "I understand loss. Your people and my people. We know same pain." From that day forward, Caleb had studied the Apache language, spending 2 years learning the words and the grammar, until he could speak it well enough to be understood. He never worked as an Army Scout again. He left Verde Valley, left the memories of what he had lost, and built a new cabin high in the Mogollon Rim, where the air was thin and the silence was complete. For 9 years, he lived as a ghost among the living. The people of Crimson Bluff saw him only 4 times a year, when he came down from the mountain to buy salt, ammunition, and tobacco. He never spoke unless spoken to, and even then his answers were short. The townspeople whispered about him in the saloons and the general store. They said he had gone mad with grief. They said he was more animal than man now, living in the wilderness, forgetting what it meant to be civilized. The truth was that Caleb Stone had not forgotten. He simply no longer cared. On the morning of September 9th, 1879, Caleb woke to the sound of a hawk crying somewhere in the distance. The sky was pale and clear, the air cool enough to see his breath. He dressed in buckskin trousers and a wool shirt, pulled on his boots, and stepped outside to check his traps. The forest was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes a man pay attention. Caleb had learned long ago to trust his instincts, and something in the air felt wrong. He picked up his Winchester, checked the load, and started down the trail toward the creek. That was when he heard the footsteps. They were uneven, stumbling, the sound of someone running hard and losing strength. Caleb moved toward the noise, his rifle ready, and saw her. A woman was running through the trees, her feet bare and bleeding, her white dress torn and stained with blood. Her long black hair hung loose around her shoulders, tangled with pine needles and dirt. She was Apache. He could tell that at a glance, and she was hurt. Caleb stepped into her path, and she nearly ran into him before she saw him. Her eyes went wide with fear, and she tried to veer away, but her legs gave out. She collapsed into the dirt, gasping for breath, her hands clutching at her shoulder where blood seeped through the torn fabric. Caleb lowered his rifle and knelt beside her. He recognized her face, though he had only seen it once before, 4 months ago, when he had found a young Apache woman lost in the forest and shown her the way back to the reservation. She had thanked him in her language, and he had responded in kind, and that had been the end of it. Now she was here, bleeding and terrified, and Caleb knew without asking that someone had hurt her badly. "Tala," he said, speaking her name in Apache. "You are safe now." She looked at him, her breath coming in ragged gasps, and for a moment she did not seem to understand. Then her eyes focused, and she saw the dream catcher hanging from his belt, the one he always carried when he left the cabin. Recognition flickered across her face. "Caleb Stone," she whispered in English, her voice raw. You helped me before." "I will help you now," he said, and without waiting for permission, he lifted her into his arms. She was light, no more than 110 pounds, her body trembling with exhaustion and pain. He carried her back to the cabin, moving quickly but carefully, his mind already working through what needed to be done. Inside, he laid her on his bed, the only bed in the cabin, and began to assess her injuries. The wound on her shoulder was deep, a rectangular gash 2 inches long and half an inch wide, the kind of injury made by a blunt object with a sharp edge. A fire poker, Caleb thought, his jaw tightening. Someone had struck her with a fire poker. Her wrists bore rope burns, the skin raw and infected, the marks at least a week old. Her ribs were covered in bruises, layered in different shades of yellow, purple, and green, indicating injuries sustained over weeks. There were finger-shaped bruises on her neck, old enough to have faded but still visible. Caleb worked in silence, his hands steady. He heated water over the fire, mixed salt into it to make a saline wash, and cleaned the shoulder wound with slow, deliberate care. Tala hissed in pain but did not pull away. He applied a poultice made from yarrow and sage, plants the Apache had taught him to use for wounds, and wrapped the injury with clean linen strips. Her wrists he treated with bear grease mixed with aloe, soothing the raw skin. He wrapped her ankle, which was swollen and likely sprained, and propped it up on a folded blanket. Through it all, Tala watched him, her dark amber eyes never leaving his face. When he was finished, he poured her a cup of water from the bucket by the door and held it to her lips. She drank slowly, her hands too weak to hold the cup herself. "Rest," Caleb said in Apache. "You are safe here." She closed her eyes, and within minutes, she was asleep, her breathing shallow but steady. Caleb sat by the fire, his rifle across his knees, and waited. For 3 days, Tala drifted in and out of consciousness, her body fighting a fever that spiked to dangerous levels. On the first day, she was delirious, crying out in Apache, her words fragmented and desperate. Caleb caught phrases. "Do not touch me. Do not hurt me. I will not obey." In her fever, she thrashed on the bed, and Caleb had to hold her still to keep her from tearing open the wound on her shoulder. At one point in her delirium, she fought him, her nails raking across his forearm, leaving 4 long scratches that bled freely. She knocked over the table beside the bed, sending a knife and a bowl of water clattering to the floor. Caleb did not flinch. He simply held her gently but firmly, speaking to her in Apache, his voice low and calm. "You are safe, Tala. No one will hurt you here." On the second day, Tala woke in the early hours before dawn, her fever still high. She was disoriented, confused, and when she saw Caleb sitting nearby, holding a small knife he had been using to cut fresh bandages, she screamed. In her mind, she was back in the Major's house, back in the nightmare she had fled. She scrambled away from Caleb, her back pressed against the cabin wall, her eyes wild with terror. Caleb set the knife down immediately, raising both hands in a gesture of peace. He spoke in Apache, his voice steady and unhurried. "I am Caleb Stone. Your father was Dakota. He saved my wife and son when they were dying of smallpox 9 years ago. I owe him a debt. You are safe in this place. I will not harm you." Tala stared at him, her chest heaving, and then her eyes moved to the dream catcher hanging on the wall. She recognized it. Her father had made dream catchers just like it, weaving them during the long winter nights when the stories were told and the old ways were remembered. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You are the man my father spoke of, the one who lost his family." Caleb nodded. Yes. Tears filled her eyes, not from pain, but from relief, from the sudden, overwhelming realization that she was not going to die here. She sank back onto the bed, her body shaking, and Caleb gave her water and willow bark tea to bring down the fever. On the third day, the fever broke. Tala woke in the afternoon, her mind clear for the first time since she had arrived. Caleb was sitting by the fire, carving a piece of wood, his rifle leaning against the wall within easy reach. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice hoarse but steady. Caleb looked up from his work. "Because your father helped my family when they needed it most, and because I saw what was done to you." Tala's gaze dropped to her bandaged shoulder, to the rope burns on her wrists. "They will come," she said. "Major Blackwood will say you took me. They will kill you." "Let them come," Caleb said, his voice flat and final. Tala studied him for a long moment, this quiet man with the scarred face and the sad eyes, and she understood that he meant what he said. He was not afraid of dying. Perhaps, she thought, he had been waiting for it. "You do not understand," she said. "Major Blackwood is powerful. He commands the soldiers at Fort Verde. He controls the town. When he says you are guilty, they will believe him." "Then let them believe, Caleb said. That afternoon, as the sun moved toward the western ridges, they heard it. The distant crack of gunfire, 3 shots in quick succession, the signal that a search party was moving through the mountains. Caleb stood and walked to the window, looking out through the narrow opening. He could not see them yet, but he knew they were coming. A lot of men, judging by the number of shots. 30, maybe more. Tala tried to sit up, pain flashing across her face. "You must leave me here. I will tell them I came on my own. You can go." Caleb turned to look at her, and for the first time since she had arrived, something like a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "I have been running for 9 years, Tala. I am tired of running." He picked up his Winchester, checked the chamber, and set it by the door. Then he sat down in his chair and waited, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes on the trail that led up from the valley below. Outside, the voices of men echoed through the trees, growing louder with each passing minute. The search party that climbed Mogollon Rim that morning was 32 men strong. At the front rode Major Marcus Blackwood, a man of 54 years, his uniform pressed and spotless, his gray hair combed back from a high forehead. He sat tall in the saddle, his jaw set, his pale blue eyes cold as ice. Behind him rode 8 cavalry troopers from Fort Verde, their rifles slung across their backs, their faces grim. And behind them came 22 men from Crimson Bluff, ranchers and shopkeepers and drifters, all armed, all eager to be part of something that felt like justice. Major Blackwood had not slept the night before. He had woken at 8 in the morning to find the bedroom window open, the rope that had bound his wife's wrists to the bed frame chewed through, and Tala gone. His rage had been immediate and volcanic. He had smashed the furniture in the bedroom, overturned the dresser, shattered the mirror. Then he had composed himself, dressed in his full uniform, and ridden into Crimson Bluff to gather a posse. The story he told was simple and convincing. His wife, a poor Apache woman he had rescued from the squalor of the reservation and brought into his home to civilize, had been kidnapped by Caleb Stone, the mad hermit who lived in the mountains. Stone had been stalking the house for weeks, the major claimed, watching from the shadows, waiting for his chance. And last night he had broken in and taken her by force. The people of Crimson Bluff believed him without question. Major Blackwood was a respected man, a hero of the Apache Wars, a pillar of the community. Caleb Stone, on the other hand, was a ghost story, a man who lived like an animal and wanted nothing to do with civilization. By 9 in the morning, the posse was assembled in the town square. Mayor Henry Whitmore, a soft man with thinning hair and a politician's instinct for self-preservation, stood on the courthouse steps and declared that this was a matter of law and order. Reverend Samuel Ashford, the town's preacher, led the men in prayer, asking God to protect them as they pursued the wicked and saved the innocent. Major Blackwood produced evidence, a piece of torn fabric from Tala's dress, which he claimed to have found on the trail leading to the mountains. Boot prints in the dirt, large and deep, the kind a man like Caleb Stone would leave. And a witness, Private Jonathan Daniels, a young soldier of 20 years, pale and stammering, who swore he had seen Caleb Stone lurking near the major's house at 2 in the morning. The witness was lying, of course. Major Blackwood had threatened the boy with a dishonorable discharge and a flogging if he did not cooperate. But no one in the crowd knew that, and no one thought to question it. Dr. Elijah Reeves stood at the back of the crowd watching and saying nothing. He was 59 years old, with white hair and wire-rimmed spectacles, and he had been the town's physician for 30 years. He had seen Major Blackwood's wives before. Margaret, the major's first wife, who had died 6 years ago in a fall from a horse. Sani, an Apache woman who had disappeared 3 years ago. Huyana, another Apache woman who had supposedly committed suicide 18 months ago. Dr. Reeves had examined Huyana's body. The official cause of death was strychnine poisoning, self-administered. But Reeves had seen the bruises on her neck, the finger-shaped marks that suggested strangulation, and he had written his suspicions in his private notes. Now, watching Major Blackwood rally the town to hunt down Caleb Stone, Dr. Reeves felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. The major was not the victim here. He was the predator. But the doctor said nothing. Not yet. He was one man, and Major Blackwood controlled the soldiers, the law, and the loyalty of the town. Speaking out now would accomplish nothing except to make himself a target. So Dr. Reeves saddled his horse and joined the posse, telling himself that he would watch and wait, and when the moment came, he would act. The ride up the mountain took 4 hours. The trail was steep and narrow, winding through stands of ponderosa pine and Douglas fir. the ground carpeted with fallen needles that muffled the sound of hooves. The men rode in silence, their faces tense, their eyes scanning the trees for any sign of movement. They found blood on the trail, dark stains on the rocks, and strips of torn white fabric caught on branches. The evidence confirmed what Major Blackwood had told them. Tala had been here, and she had been hurt. At 1:30 in the afternoon, they reached the clearing where Caleb Stone's cabin stood. It was a small structure, humble and weathered, smoke rising from the chimney in a thin gray line. The door was closed, the windows shuttered. The men spread out, forming a loose circle around the cabin, their rifles raised. Major Blackwood dismounted and walked to the front of the group, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. "Stone!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the trees. "Bring my wife out now, or we will burn this place to the ground with you in it." For a long moment, there was no response. Then the door opened, and Caleb Stone stepped out into the sunlight. He was unarmed, his hands empty and visible. He stood on the threshold, his scarred face calm, his gray eyes sweeping over the men who surrounded him. "I did not take her," Caleb said, his voice low and steady. "She came here on her own." "Liar!" someone shouted from the crowd. Major Blackwood strode forward, his face twisted with anger. "You kidnapped my wife, you filthy savage! You dragged her up here and did God knows what to her." "Look at the wounds on her body," Caleb said, his gaze fixed on the major. "They are not new. She has been hurt for a long time, and not by me." The major's jaw tightened. "You will hang for this, Stone." 6 men rushed forward, grabbing Caleb by the arms, forcing him to the ground. They tied his hands behind his back with rough hemp rope, pulling it so tight that the skin split and bled. One man kicked him in the ribs, another spat in his face. Caleb did not resist. He let them take him, his expression unchanged, his breathing slow and controlled. Inside the cabin, the men found Tala lying on the bed, her skin slick with sweat, her shoulder bandaged, her eyes half closed. The table beside the bed was overturned, a knife and a bowl of water scattered on the floor. There were scratches on Caleb's forearm, fresh and red, 4 parallel lines where fingernails had dug into flesh. To the men who entered that cabin, the scene told a story they had already decided to believe. The woman had been taken by force. She had fought back. The overturned table, the knife, the scratches on the man's arm, all of it was proof of her struggle. Dr. Reeves pushed through the crowd and knelt beside Tala. He examined her shoulder wound, noting the rectangular shape, the depth, the angle. This was not a knife wound. This was a blunt object, something with a corner, like a fire poker. He checked her wrists. The rope burns were old, at least a week, maybe more. The skin had begun to heal, the scabs dry and cracked. He looked at the bruises on her ribs. They were layered, different colors, different stages of healing. Yellow bruises, at least 3 weeks old. Purple bruises, 10 days. Red bruises, fresh within the last 2 days. Dr. Reeves stood and turned to face Major Blackwood. "These injuries are not new, Major. She has been hurt over a period of weeks. This woman has been abused." The Major's eyes flashed with fury. "She was held captive by Stone for weeks. That is why the injuries are old. He has been hiding her here, torturing her. But she only ran from your house this morning," Dr. Reeves had said carefully. "How could Stone have inflicted injuries that are weeks old?" "Enough," Major Blackwood barked. "You will take my wife back to town and treat her injuries as I have instructed. Stone will be locked in the jail. Tomorrow we will hold a trial and he will answer for what he has done." Dr. Reeves opened his mouth to argue, but the major stepped closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Do your job, doctor, and do not overstep your place." Tala was carried out of the cabin on a makeshift stretcher, her body too weak to protest. As they lifted her, she opened her eyes and saw Caleb being dragged toward a horse, his hands bound, blood running from a cut on his forehead. She tried to speak, to tell them the truth, but her voice was too weak, her words lost in the noise and chaos. All she managed was a whisper in Apache, "He saved me." No one heard her. Caleb was thrown onto the back of a horse like a sack of grain, his body bouncing with each step as they descended the mountain. The men jeered at him, calling him a monster, a devil, a beast. Some threw rocks, others spat. Caleb said nothing. His eyes found Tala one last time as she was carried past him. And in that moment, their gazes met. He saw the fear in her eyes, the desperation, and he wanted to tell her that it would be all right, that the truth would come out, that justice would prevail. But he had lived long enough to know that sometimes the truth does not matter. Sometimes the world believes what it wants to believe, and no amount of evidence will change that. By the time they reached Crimson Bluff, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. Caleb was locked in a small wooden cell behind the courthouse, his hands still bound, his body aching from the beating he had received on the trail. Tala was taken to the Major's house, where Dr. Reeves was allowed to treat her under the Major's watchful eye. The doctor worked quickly and quietly, changing her bandages, giving her water, checking her pulse. When the Major left the room for a moment, Tala grabbed Dr. Reeves by the wrist, her grip weak but urgent. "Caleb Stone did not hurt me," she whispered in English. "My husband hurt me. He beats me. He ties me up. He hurts me every day." Dr. Reeves stared at her, his heart pounding. "Are you certain?" "Yes," Tala said, tears streaming down her face. "Caleb Stone saved my life, and they will kill him for it." The doctor nodded slowly, his mind racing. He needed proof. He needed evidence that could not be dismissed or ignored. That evening, after the Major had gone to meet with the town council, Dr. Reeves returned to his office and began searching through his old medical records. He found what he was looking for in a dusty file cabinet at the back of the room. 3 files, 3 women, 3 deaths. Margaret Blackwood, the Major's first wife, died 6 years ago. Official cause, fall from a horse. But the notes from the previous town doctor, now retired, read, skull fracture inconsistent with fall, suspect blunt force trauma, investigation denied by Major Blackwood. Sani, Apache, age 22. Disappeared 3 years ago. Nobody ever found. But there was a report from an Apache woman at the reservation who claimed Sani had been beaten by Major Blackwood the week before she vanished. Huiana, Apache, age 19. Died 18 months ago. Official cause, suicide by strychnine poisoning. But Dr. Reeves had examined the body himself, and his private notes read, bruising on neck consistent with strangulation. No strychnine in house. Suspect foul play. Dr. Reeves sat in his office, the 3 files spread before him, and he understood the terrible truth. Major Marcus Blackwood was not a hero. He was a killer, and Tala would be his next victim unless someone stopped him. Outside, the wind moved through the streets of Crimson Bluff, carrying with it the scent of dust and sage and distant rain. In his cell, Caleb Stone sat in the darkness, his hands finally unbound, his body still and silent. He did not know if he would live to see another sunrise, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. If he died tomorrow, he would die knowing that he had tried to save her. And for the first time in 9 years, that felt like enough. The morning of September 10th arrived cold and clear, the kind of morning when the air tasted like metal, and every sound carried farther than it should. The town square of Crimson Bluff filled early, more than 200 people crowding into the space between the courthouse and the general store, their faces tight with anticipation and anger. This was not a trial in any legal sense. There was no judge from outside the territory, no jury selected according to law, no defense attorney to speak for the accused. There was only Mayor Henry Whitmore, standing on the courthouse steps with a gavel in his hand, and Major Marcus Blackwood, dressed in his full military uniform, medals gleaming on his chest like tiny suns. Caleb Stone stood in the center of the square, tied to a wooden post that had been driven into the ground for this purpose. His hands were bound behind his back, his face swollen from the beating he had received the day before. Blood had dried in his beard, and his left eye was nearly swollen shut. But he stood straight, his shoulders back, his good eye fixed on the horizon beyond the crowd. He looked like a man who had already accepted his fate. Mayor Whitmore banged his gavel 3 times, calling for silence. The murmur of the crowd died down, replaced by an expectant hush. "We are gathered here today," the mayor began, his voice trembling slightly, "to determine the guilt or innocence of Caleb Stone, who stands accused of kidnapping, assault, and other crimes against the wife of Major Marcus Blackwood." A few people in the crowd shouted their agreement. Someone threw a rock that struck Caleb in the shoulder. He did not flinch. Major Blackwood stepped forward, his posture rigid, his expression a carefully constructed mask of righteous fury. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind a dozen times, and now he delivered his speech with the precision of a theater actor. Caleb Stone is a man who has lived outside the bounds of civilization for 9 years, the major began, his voice carrying across the square. He has rejected the company of decent people. He has made his home in the wilderness like an animal. And when he saw my wife, a poor Apache woman whom I had rescued from the squalor of the reservation and brought into my home to educate and civilize, he coveted her. The major paused, letting the words sink in. He stalked my home. He watched from the shadows. And when the opportunity arose, he broke into my house in the dead of night, took my wife by force and dragged her up into the mountains to do unspeakable things to her. Murmurs of outrage rippled through the crowd. A woman near the front began to cry. Major Blackwood gestured toward a small table that had been set up beside the mayor. On it lay the so-called evidence: the torn piece of white fabric from Tala's dress, the knife that Caleb had used to cut bandages, and a coil of rope. "We found my wife in his cabin," the major continued, his voice rising. "She was injured, bleeding, barely conscious. The table beside her bed had been overturned in a struggle. There were scratches on Stone's arm where she had fought to defend herself. And when we confronted him, he did not deny that she was there. He only lied, claiming that she had come to him willingly, as if any woman would willingly go to a man like this." The major turned to face Caleb directly, his eyes cold and flat. "You will hang for what you have done, Stone, and the world will be better for it." The crowd erupted in shouts and applause. Men pumped their fists in the air. Women nodded in grim satisfaction. Caleb Stone said nothing. He simply looked at the major, his expression unreadable, and waited. Mayor Whitmore banged his gavel again. "Does the accused have anything to say in his defense?" Caleb took a slow breath, his ribs aching from where he had been kicked the day before. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but steady, and the crowd had to strain to hear him. "I did not kidnap Tala," he said. "She came to my cabin on her own, running from something. She was injured when she arrived. I treated her wounds. I gave her shelter. That is all." "Lies," someone shouted from the crowd. "The scratches on my arm," Caleb continued, ignoring the interruption, "were made by her when she was delirious with fever. She was fighting ghosts in her mind, not me. The overturned table was knocked over during her fever. The knife was used to cut bandages, nothing more." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the faces in the crowd. "If I wanted to harm someone, why would I choose the wife of the most powerful man in this territory? Why would I bring that kind of attention to myself? Why would I treat her wounds and care for her if my intention was to hurt her?" For a moment, a ripple of uncertainty moved through the crowd. A few people exchanged glances. The logic of Caleb's words was undeniable, but Major Blackwood was ready for this. He stepped forward again, his voice sharp. "Because you are insane, Stone. Because 9 years of living alone in the mountains have rotted your mind. You took her because you could, and now you lie because you think it will save you." The crowd roared its approval. The moment of doubt passed as quickly as it had come. Dr. Elijah Reeves had been standing near the back of the crowd, his medical bag in his hand, his face pale with worry. Now he pushed his way forward, his voice rising above the noise. "Wait," he called. "Wait, please. I have examined the woman. I have seen her injuries. And I must tell you that Mr. Stone is correct. Those injuries are not consistent with a single night of captivity." The crowd turned to look at him, some confused, others hostile. Mayor Whitmore frowned. "What do you mean, Doctor?" Dr. Reeves climbed the courthouse steps, standing beside the mayor so that everyone could see him. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket, his hand shaking slightly. "I examined Tala yesterday," he said, his voice gaining strength. "The wound on her shoulder is deep and rectangular in shape. It was not made by a knife or a fist. It was made by a blunt object with a corner, likely a fire poker. The injury is at least 3 to 4 days old, based on the stage of healing." He unfolded the paper, reading from his notes. "The rope burns on her wrists show significant healing. The outer layer of skin has begun to regenerate. This takes at least 10 to 14 days. If she was taken only yesterday morning, as the major claims, These injuries could not exist. The crowd began to murmur. Unhalsably murmur. The sound fang a swarm of bees. Dr. Reeves pressed on. Furthermore, the bruises on her ribs are layered. There are yellow bruises, which are at least 3 weeks old, purple bruises, approximately 10 days old, and fresh red bruises, no more than 2 days old. This pattern is consistent with repeated abuse over an extended period, not a single violent encounter. He looked directly at Major Blackwood. Tala has been hurt for a long time, Major, and she was not hurt by Caleb Stone. The Major's face went rigid, his jaw clenching. For a moment he said nothing. Then he smiled, a thin, humorless expression that did not reach his eyes. Dr. Reeves, you are far mistaken, he said smoothly. My wife was held by Stone for weeks, not days. He took her long before yesterday morning. He has been hiding her in the mountains of Shawagins, waiting for his chance to do even more harm. That is why the injuries are old. Bauer Reeves shook his head. But she was seen in your house as recently as 3 days ago, Major. The maid who cleans your home will confirm this. The maid is a Mexican woman who barely speaks English, the Major snapped. She is confused. You cannot trust her word. Before Dr. Reeves could respond, another voice rang out from the crowd, high and wavering but filled with conviction. I am not confused, and I know what I saw. An old woman pushed her way through the crowd, her back bent with age, her white hair pulled into a tight bun. It was widow Martha Crane, 73 years old, who lived in a small house directly across the street from Major Blackwood's residence. She climbed the courthouse steps slowly, leaning on a wooden cane, and turned to face the crowd. Her eyes were sharp and bright, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight that made people listen. I am Martha Crane, she said. I have lived in this town for 50 years. I have seen 3 wars, 2 famines, and more funerals than I care to count. And I am not a liar. She pointed a gnarled finger at Major Blackwood. I have lived across from that man's house for 6 years, and I have heard screams coming from that house almost every night for the past 4 months. The crowd went silent. I have seen him drag that poor Apache girl out into the yard by her hair, Martha continued, her voice rising. I have seen him tie her to a post on his porch and leave her there in the rain for hours while he drank whiskey and watched. I have seen him strike her with a riding crop until she collapsed. Major Blackwood's face flushed red. You are a senile old woman who sees things that are not there. I am old, Martha shot back, but I am not blind, and I am not deaf. I know what I have seen, I know what I have heard, and I have kept silent because I was afraid. Afraid of you, Major, afraid that if I spoke, you would find a way to silence me. She turned to address the crowd. But I will not be silent anymore. This man, Caleb Stone, did not hurt that girl. She ran to him because he was the only person she thought might help her. And now you want to hang him for the crime of showing her mercy. The crowd erupted into chaos, some people shouting in support of Martha, others yelling that she was lying to protect a criminal. Mayor Whitmore banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order, but the noise only grew louder. Major Blackwood stepped forward, his voice cutting through the din like a blade. Enough! This is a bird. So absurd. You are listening to the ramblings of a confused old woman and a doctor who has been deceived by the lies of a savage. He pointed it at Caleb. This man is guilty. The evidence is clear. And if you will not see justice done, then I will do it myself. He reached for the revolver at his hip, but before he could draw it, another voice stopped him cold. You will do nothing of the kind, Major Blackwood. Mayor Whitmore stepped between the Major and Caleb, his face pale but his voice firm. We will hear from the woman herself. Bring Tala here. Let her speak. If she confirms your story, then Stone will hang. But if she does not, then we must reconsider. The Major's jaw tightened, but he could not refuse without appearing guilty himself. He nodded curtly. Fine. Bring her. But she is weak and confused. You will see that for yourselves. 20 minutes later, 2 soldiers carried Tala into the square on a wooden chair. She was dressed in a clean white dress, her hair brushed and tied back, but her face was pale and drawn, and she moved with the careful stiffness of someone in great pain. The crowd parted to let her through, and the soldiers set the chair down near the courthouse steps. Tala sat with her hands folded in her lap, her eyes downcast, her breathing shallow. Mayor Whitmore approached her gently. Ma'am, we need you to tell us what happened. Did Caleb Stone take you against your will? Tala did not answer immediately. She lifted her head slowly, her amber eyes scanning the crowd until they found Caleb, still tied to the post, his face battered, but his gaze steady. Their eyes met and something passed between them, an unspoken understanding. Caleb gave a small nod, so slight that most people missed it. It was a gesture that said, "Tell the truth. Whatever happens to me, tell the truth." Tala took a shaky breath and began to speak, her voice quiet at first, but growing stronger with each word. "My name is Tala," she said in English, her accent heavy but her words clear. "I am the daughter of War Chief Dakota of the Apache people. 4 months ago, Major Blackwood came to the reservation. He told me I would be his wife. I was not asked. I was told." The crowd stirred, but no one interrupted. "He said he would teach me to be civilized," Tala continued, her hands gripping the arms of the chair. "But he did not teach. He hurt. Every day he hurt me. If I spoke Apache, he hit me. If I did not obey, he used a whip. If I refused him at night, he used his fists." Her voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. "4 nights ago, he was drunk. He was angry because I would not submit to him. He took the iron poker from the fireplace and struck me here." She pulled down the shoulder of her dress, revealing the bandaged wound. The crowd gasped. "He tied my hands to the bed with rope," Tala said, her voice trembling. "He said I would never leave. But when he fell asleep, I chewed through the rope with my teeth. It took me a long time. My mouth bled, but I freed myself and I ran." She looked directly at Major Blackwood, her eyes blazing. "I did not run to the reservation. I knew the soldiers would bring me back to you. I ran to the only person I thought might help me, Caleb Stone." The major opened his mouth to speak, but Tala raised her hand, silencing him. "I met him once before," she said. 5 months ago, before you took me. I was lost in the forest, and he showed me the way home. He did not ask who I was. He did not touch me. He spoke to me in my language and treated me with respect. That is why I went to him, because he was the only white man I have ever met who saw me as a person." She gestured to Caleb. "When I arrived at his cabin, I was bleeding. I was sick with fever. I was dying. He cared for my wounds. He gave me water and medicine. When the fever made me crazy, when I fought him and scratched him, he did not hurt me. He only held me so I would not hurt myself." Tala's voice rose, filled with a fierce conviction. "Caleb Stone did not take me. He saved me. And if you hang him, you are killing an innocent man to protect a monster." The silence that followed was absolute. Not a single person in the crowd moved or spoke. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then Major Blackwood exploded. "Enough!" he roared, his face purple with rage. "You are confused! You are sick! You do not know what you are saying!" He strode toward Tala, his hand reaching for her arm, but she recoiled, her eyes wide with terror. "Do not touch me," she cried in Apache, then switched to English. "Do not ever touch me again." The major grabbed her wrist anyway, his fingers digging into the rope burns, and Tala screamed in pain. Blood began to seep through the bandages. That was the moment everything changed. Dr. Reeves shouted, "Let her go," and rushed forward. Reverend Ashford followed, his face pale with shock. Within seconds, 6 men had pulled Major Blackwood away from Tala, holding him back as he struggled and cursed. "She is my wife," the major bellowed. "She belongs to me. I have the right to discipline her." "No man has the right to hurt a woman like this," Reverend Ashford said, his voice shaking. "This is not discipline. This is cruelty." Mayor Whitmore looked from Tala to the major, his face ashen. "Major Blackwood, I think we need to hear more before we proceed." "There is nothing more to hear," the major snarled. "This is a farce. You are listening to the lies of a savage and an old woman. I demand that you hang Stone immediately." But the crowd was no longer with him. The people of Crimson Bluff had seen Tala's terror when the major touched her. They had seen the blood on her wrist, and they had heard the desperation in her voice when she begged him not to touch her. Dr. Reeves stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "I have something else to show you. All of you." He reached into his medical bag and pulled out 3 files, holding them up for everyone to see. "These are medical records," he said. Three women who were connected to Major Blackwood. Three women who are now dead or missing. He opened the first file. Margaret Blackwood, the Major's first wife. She died 6 years ago. The official cause of death was a fall from a horse. But the doctor who examined her body wrote in his notes that the skull fracture was inconsistent with a fall. He suspected blunt force trauma. He tried to investigate, but Major Blackwood refused to allow it. The crowd murmured, the sound growing louder. Dr. Reeves opened the second file. Sonny, an Apache woman. She lived with Major Blackwood 3 years ago. She disappeared one night and was never seen again. No body was ever found. But there is a report from a woman at the reservation who said Sonny had been beaten by the Major the week before she vanished. The murmuring became a roar. Dr. Reeves opened the third file, his voice rising to be heard. Huyana, another Apache woman. She died 18 months ago. The official cause of death was suicide by strychnine poisoning, but I examined her body myself. There were bruises on her neck, consistent with strangulation, and there was no strychnine in the Major's house. He looked around at the crowd, his eyes burning with a conviction. Major Blackwood is not a victim. He is a murderer, and Tala will be his next victim if we do not stop him. The crowd erupted into chaos. People shouted accusations, demanded answers, called for the Major to be arrested. Major Blackwood stood in the center of the storm, his face contorted with fury and disbelief. "This is insane," he shouted. "You are all insane. I have served this territory for 20 years. I have fought the Apache, protected your families, has brought order to this land, and now you believe the lies of a doctor who is clearly in league with Stone." But his words fell on deaf ears. The tide had turned, and everyone could feel it. Then a young man in a cavalry uniform stepped forward, his face pale and his hands shaking. It was Lieutenant Owen Fletcher, the Major's second in command, a man of 30 years who had always been quiet and obedient. "I have something to say," Fletcher said, his voice barely above a whisper. The crowd turned to look at him. Major Blackwood's eyes went wide with alarm. "Lieutenant Fletcher, return to your post," the Major ordered. "Now." But Fletcher shook his head. "No, sir, I cannot, not anymore." He turned to face the crowd. "Major Blackwood ordered me to help him cover up Huyana's death. He told me to write in the report that she had committed suicide. But I saw her body before anyone else did. There were bruises on her neck, finger-shaped bruises. She did not kill herself. She was strangled." The crowd gasped. "I said nothing," Fletcher continued, his voice breaking. "I was afraid. The Major threatened to destroy my career, to have me court-martialed for insubordination. So I wrote the report the way he told me to, and I have lived with that guilt every day since." He looked at Tala, tears streaming down his face. "I am sorry. I should have spoken sooner. I should have protected you. I failed." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Major Blackwood seemed stunned, his mouth opening and closing but no words coming out. Mayor Whitmore cleared his throat, his voice hoarse. "Major Blackwood, in light of these revelations, I am ordering your arrest. You will be held in custody until a proper judge can be brought from Phoenix to conduct a full investigation." "You cannot do this," the Major roared. "I am a major in the United States Army. You have no authority over me." "I have every authority," the mayor said quietly. "And if you resist, these men will use force." 10 men stepped forward, their rifles raised, their faces grim. Major Blackwood looked around, searching for allies, but found none. Even his own soldiers had backed away, unwilling to defend him. Slowly, with the air of a man who has been betrayed by the world, Major Blackwood raised his hands. The soldiers moved in, binding his wrists with the same rough rope that had been used on Caleb Stone. As they led him toward the jail, the Major turned back one last time, his eyes locking onto Tala. His voice was low and venomous, meant only for her. "You will regret this, you Apache whore. You and Stone both. I will find a way. I always do." Tala did not flinch. She met his gaze with a steadiness that surprised even herself. "You have no power over me anymore," she said. "I am free." The crowd watched in silence as Major Blackwood was dragged away, his uniform torn, his pride shattered. It was a sight that none of them would ever forget. Mayor Whitmore turned to the soldiers holding Caleb. "Cut him loose." The ropes fell away and Caleb stood, rubbing his wrists where the hemp had cut into his skin. He did not speak, did not thank anyone. He simply walked over to where Tala sat and knelt beside her chair. "Are you all right?" He asked in Apache. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Because of you." Goddard Reeves approached, his medical bag in hand. "We need to get her back to my office. She needs rest and proper care." Caleb nodded and stepped back, allowing the doctor to take over. But before Tala was carried away, she reached out and took Caleb's hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you," she whispered. Caleb said nothing. He simply squeezed her hand in return, a promise without words. That evening, as the sun set over Crimson Bluff, Dr. Reeves sat in his office with a lamp burning on his desk. Tala was asleep in the back room, her breathing steady, her fever gone. Widow Martha Crane sat in a chair by the door, knitting quietly, having volunteered to stay and watch over the girl. There was a knock at the door, and Caleb Stone stepped inside. He had washed the blood from his face and changed into clean clothes, though his left eye was still swollen and his ribs ached with every breath. "How is she?" he asked. "She will live," Dr. Reeves said, "but it will take time for her to heal, both in body and in spirit." Caleb nodded. "And the major?" "Locked in a cell. A judge will arrive from Phoenix in 2 weeks to conduct a proper trial. Until then, he will remain behind bars." Caleb was silent for a moment, his gaze distant. He said he would find a way. Men like him always do. Derived Reeves leaned back in his chair, studying the mountain man with tired eyes. "What will you do now, Mr. Stone?" Caleb looked toward the back room where Tala slept. "I will stay until I know she is safe. After that, I will go back to my mountain." "She asked about you," Dr. Reeves said quietly. "When she woke earlier, she wanted to know if you were alive." Caleb's expression softened, just slightly. "Tell her I am, and tell her she is free now. She does not owe me anything." But even as he said the words, Caleb knew that something had changed. For 9 years, he had been a ghost, a man waiting to die. Now, for the first time in those 9 years, he felt something stir inside him that he had thought was gone forever. Hope. 2 days passed. The town of Crimson Bluff settled into an uneasy quiet, the kind that comes after a storm when everyone is still assessing the damage. Major Blackwood remained in his cell, refusing to eat, refusing to speak. He sat in the darkness, his mind churning with rage and plans for revenge. On the 3rd day, a young Apache woman arrived in town, riding a horse bareback, her long black hair flying behind her. Her name was Kaya, and she was Tala's younger sister, 15 years old and fierce as a wild cat. She had heard the news from someone at the reservation, and she had come to see if it was true, if her sister was really alive and free. Dr. Reeves took Kaya to the back room where Tala was sitting up in bed, eating a bowl of soup. When Kaya saw her sister, she burst into tears and ran to her, throwing her arms around Tala's neck. The two women held each other, sobbing and laughing, speaking in rapid Apache, their words tumbling over each other. Caleb stood in the doorway watching them, and for the first time in 9 years, he smiled. That night, Tala asked to see Caleb. Dr. Reeves brought him to the back room, then left them alone, closing the door behind him. Tala was sitting on the edge of the bed, her shoulder still bandaged, but her color much improved. Kaya sat beside her, holding her hand. "Thank you for coming," Tala said in English. "I wanted you to meet my sister." Caleb nodded to Kaya, who studied him with the wary intensity of a young predator. "Your sister is strong," he said in Apache, "like you." Kaya's expression softened slightly. "You are the one who saved her." "She saved herself," Caleb said. "I only gave her a place to rest." Tala shook her head. "You did more than that. You stood between me and death. You let them beat you. You let them tie you up and threaten to hang you. And you never once asked for anything in return." Caleb was silent for a moment, his gaze steady. "Your father saved my family when they were dying. I owed him a debt." "That debt was paid long ago," Tala said softly. "What you did because you are a good man." The words hung in the air between them, fragile and true. "What will you do now?" Caleb asked. Tala looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "I do not know. I cannot go back to the reservation. The major may be in jail, but his soldiers are still there, and they will not forget what happened. And I cannot stay in this town. Too many people still think I am a liar." "Then come back to the mountain," Caleb said. "Both of you. Stay at my cabin until you are strong enough to decide what comes next. Tala stared at him, searching his face for any sign of ulterior motive. But all she saw was sincerity. You would do that? She asked. Yes. Kaya looked at her sister, her expression questioning. Tala squeezed her hand and nodded. We will come, Tala said. But even as she agreed, a cold feeling settled in her chest, a warning that something was not finished. She was right. That same night, in the darkness of his cell, Major Marcus Blackwood was not alone. A man had come to visit him, slipping past the guards with a bribe of $20 and a bottle of whiskey. The man was a drifter named Silas Cobb, a killer for hire, and he owed the Major a favor from years past. I need you to do something for me, the Major whispered through the bars. There is an Apache girl in town. Her name is Tala. She has a younger sister named Kaya. I want them both dead. And I want the man who helped them, Caleb Stone, dead as well. Silas Cobb smiled, his teeth yellow in the lamplight. That will cost you. I have money hidden, the Major said. $200 in gold, buried under the floorboards of my house. Take it. Just make sure they suffer. Cobb nodded. Consider it done. He slipped back into the night, and Major Blackwood lay down on the narrow cot in his cell, a faint smile on his lips. He had been telling the truth when he said he'd always found a way. The storm was not over. It was only beginning. Far to the north, in the cabin on Mogollon Rim, Caleb Stone sat by his fire, cleaning his Winchester rifle with practiced hands. He did not know that Major Blackwood had already set his revenge in motion. He did not know that a killer named Silas Cobb was riding toward Crimson Bluff with murder on his mind. But he would find out soon enough. And when he did, the mountains would run red with blood before justice could finally be won. Then a voice rang out from the back of the crowd, loud and sharp and filled with an urgency that made people turn around. Wait, please, you must wait. Dr. Elijah Reeves pushed his way through the crowd, his medical bag clutched in one hand, his other hand raised above his head to get attention. He was 59 years old with the white hair that stuck out in all directions and wire-rimmed spectacles that kept sliding down his nose. His coat was rumpled, his tie askew, and he looked like he had not slept in 2 days. Wait, please, he said again, breathless as he reached the front of the crowd. I have examined the woman. I have seen her injuries. And I must tell you that Mr. Stone is correct. Those injuries are not consistent with a single night of captivity. The crowd turned to look at him, some confused, others hostile. Mayor Whitmore frowned, his brow furrowing. What do you mean, Doctor? Dorada Reeves climbed the courthouse steps, his legs shaking from exhaustion and nerves. He stood beside the mayor, pulling a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket. His hands were trembling, and it took him 2 tries to unfold the paper. I examined Tala yesterday at Major Blackwood's request, he said, his voice growing stronger as he found his footing. I documented her injuries in detail, as is my practice with all patients, and what I found does not match the story we have been told. He looked down at his notes, then back up at the crowd. The wound on her shoulder is deep, approximately 2 inches long and ½ an inch wide. It has a rectangular shape with clean edges. This type of wound is not made by a knife or a fist. It is made by a blunt object with the corner, such as an iron poker or a heavy tool. Based on the degree of healing, the inflammation, and the formation of granulation tissue, this wound is at least 3 to 4 days old. A murmur went through the crowd. 3 to 4 days old, but Tala had only been missing since yesterday morning. Dr. Reeves continued, reading from his notes. The rope burns on her wrist show significant healing. The epidermis, the outer layer of skin, has begun to regenerate. New tissue is forming beneath the damaged area. This process takes a minimum of 10 to 14 days. If she had been bound yesterday morning, as the major claims, these injuries could not possibly exist in their current state. He looked up, his eyes moving from face to face in the crowd. Furthermore, the bruises on her torso are layered, indicating multiple instances of trauma over an extended period. There are yellow bruises, which are at least 3 weeks old, purple bruises, approximately 10 days old, and fresh red bruises no more than 48 hours old. This pattern is consistent with repeated physical abuse over many weeks, not a single violent encounter. The murmuring grew louder. People were beginning to understand what the doctor was saying, and they did not like it. Dr. Reeves turned to face Major Blackwood directly. Tala has been hurt for a long time, Major. She has been hurt repeatedly, systematically, and she was not hurt by Caleb Stone. The Major's face went rigid, his jaw clenching so hard that the muscles stood out like cords. For a moment he said nothing, his mind racing as he calculated his next move. Then he smiled, a thin, humorless expression that did not reach his eyes. Dr. Reeves, he said smoothly, his voice dripping with condescension, you are a good physician, but you are mistaken in your interpretation. My wife was not taken yesterday morning. She was taken weeks ago. Stone has been holding her in the mountains all this time, keeping her prisoner, doing God knows what to her. That is why the injuries are old. That is why they have had time to heal. It was a clever lie, and for a moment it seemed like it might work. But Dr. Reeves was ready. That cannot be true, Major, he said firmly. Your housemaid, Consuela Martinez, came to my office yesterday evening. She was very distressed. She told me that she saw Tala in your home as recently as 3 days ago. She saw bruises on Tala's arms and heard crying from the bedroom. She wanted to help, but was afraid to speak out. The Major's eyes flashed with rage. That woman is a Mexican peasant who barely speaks English. She is confused. You cannot trust her word over mine. I can trust what I saw with my own eyes, Dr. Reeves said. I have treated injuries like this before, Major. I know what repeated abuse looks like, and I will not stand by and watch an innocent man hang to protect a guilty one. The crowd erupted into chaos, some people shouting in support of the doctor, others yelling that he was being deceived by Stone's lies. Mayor Whitmore banged his gavel over and over, but it was like trying to stop a flood with a teacup. Before the mayor could restore order, another voice rang out, high and wavering, but filled with an unmistakable conviction. The doctor is right, and I can prove it. An old woman pushed her way through the crowd, leaning heavily on a wooden cane. She was small and bent with age, her white hair pulled back into a severe bun, her face lined with decades of hard living. But her eyes were sharp and bright, and when she looked at Major Blackwood, there was no fear in her gaze. It was Widow Martha Crane, 73 years old, who had lived in Crimson Bluff longer than anyone else still breathing. She had buried 3 husbands, raised 7 children, and survived more hardships than most people could imagine. She was not a woman who scared easily. She climbed the courthouse steps slowly, her cane tapping against the wood with each step, and turned to face the crowd. When she spoke, her voice was thin but clear, and it carried a weight that made even the angry men in the back of the crowd fall silent. My name is Martha Crane, she said. I have lived in this town for 52 years. I have seen 3 wars, 2 famines, a cholera epidemic that killed half the children in this valley, and more funerals than I care to count. I have never been a liar, and I am too old to start now. She pointed a gnarled finger at Major Blackwood, her hand steady. I live across the street from that man's house. My bedroom window faces his, and I have heard screams coming from that house almost every night for the past 4 months. The crowd went completely silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. I have seen him drag that poor Apache girl out into the yard by her hair, Martha continued, her voice growing stronger. I have seen him tie her to the porch railing and leave her there in the rain for hours while he sat inside drinking whiskey and watching through the window. I have seen him strike her with a riding crop until she fell to her knees and begged him to stop. Major Blackwood's face flushed deep red. You are a senile old woman who sees things that are not there. Your mind is failing, and you do not know the difference between dreams and reality. Martha Crane's eyes blazed. I am old, Major Blackwood, but I am not blind, and I am not deaf, and I am not stupid. I know what I have seen. I know what I have heard. And I have kept silent all this time because I was afraid. Afraid of you. Afraid that if I spoke out, you would find a way to hurt me the way you hurt those women. She turned to address the crowd, her voice rising with passion. But I will not be silent anymore. I will not stand here and watch you hang a man who tried to help that girl. Caleb Stone did not hurt her. She ran to him because he was the only person she thought might save her life. And now you want to kill him for showing her mercy." The crowd erupted again, but this time the shouts were mixed. Some people were yelling that Martha was lying, that she was protecting a criminal. But others were beginning to voice their doubts, their questions, their uncertainty. Is it true? Did the major really hurt her? Why would Martha lie? She has no reason to lie. Mayor Whitmore looked desperately from Martha to the major to the crowd, his face pale and slick with sweat. He had lost control of the situation and he knew it. Major Blackwood stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists, his voice like thunder. "Enough! This is absurd. You are listening to the ramblings of a senile old woman and a doctor who has been deceived by the lies of a savage Apache. The evidence is clear. Stone had my wife in his cabin. She was injured. There were signs of a struggle. What more do you need?" He pointed at Caleb, his finger shaking with rage. "This man is guilty. If you will not see justice done, then by God, I will do it myself." He reached for the revolver at his hip, his intention clear. He was going to shoot Caleb Stone where he stood. But before his hand could close on the grip, Mayor Whitmore stepped between them, his voice high and desperate. "No, Major Blackwood, no! We will do this properly!" The mayor turned to the crowd, his voice pleading. "We will hear from the woman herself. Bring Tala here. Let her speak. If she confirms the major's story, then Stone will hang. But if she does not, then we must reconsider everything we have been told." Major Blackwood's jaw worked furiously, but he could not refuse the mayor's demand without appearing guilty himself. Slowly, reluctantly, he lowered his hand from his revolver and nodded. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "Bring her. But I warn you, she is weak and confused. She may not remember everything clearly. You cannot trust everything she says." 2 soldiers were sent to fetch Tala. The crowd waited in tense silence, the air thick with anticipation. 20 minutes passed, each one feeling like an hour. Finally, the soldiers returned, carrying Tala on a simple wooden chair. She was dressed in a clean white dress that the major had given her, her long black hair brushed and tied back with a ribbon. But her face was pale. Her eyes ringed with dark circles, and she moved with the careful stiffness of someone in constant pain. The soldiers set the chair down near the courthouse steps, and Tala sat with her hands folded in her lap, her eyes downcast, her breathing shallow and labored. The crowd stared at her, some with sympathy, others with suspicion. She was Apache, and many of the people in Crimson Bluff had fought against the Apache in the wars, had lost friends and family to Apache raids. It was hard for them to see her as a victim. Mayor Whitmore approached her gently, his voice soft. "Ma'am, I know you have been through a terrible ordeal, but we need you to tell us the truth. Did Caleb Stone take you against your will? Did he hurt you?" Tala did not answer immediately. She sat very still, her eyes still downcast, and for a long moment it seemed like she might not speak at all. Then slowly she lifted her head. Her amber eyes scanned the crowd, moving from face to face, until they found Caleb Stone, still tied to the post, his face battered, but his gaze steady and calm. Their eyes met across the distance, and something passed between them, an understanding that needed no words. Caleb gave a small nod, so slight that most people missed it. But Tala saw it, and she understood what he was telling her. "Tell the truth. Whatever happens to me, tell the truth." Tala took a shaky breath and began to speak. Her voice was quiet at first, barely more than a whisper, but it grew stronger with each word. "My name is Tala," she said in English, her accent thick but her words clear and deliberate. "I am the daughter of War Chief Dakota of the Lipin Apache people. My father was killed 5 years ago by cavalry soldiers. My mother died giving birth to my sister, Kaya. For 5 years, Kaya and I have lived at Fort Verde Reservation." She paused, gathering her strength. The crowd listened in absolute silence. 4 months ago, in the month of May, Major Blackwood came to the reservation with his soldiers. He stood in front of Chief Manuelito and the council. He pointed at me. He said, "I will take this one as my wife. It is the policy of the United States government to help Apache people integrate into civilized society." Her voice trembled but did not break. "I was not asked if I wanted this. I was told it would happen." Chief Manuelito tried to refuse. He said I was the daughter of a war chief, that I was not property to be given away. But Major Blackwood said if the council refused, he would cut our food rations by half. He said the old people and the children would starve before winter came. Several people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. They had not known about this part of the story. I went with him, Tala continued, to save my people, to save my sister. But I knew I was not going to a home. I was going to a prison. She raised her eyes to look directly at Major Blackwood, and there was no fear in her gaze now, only a cold, burning anger. On the first night in his house, he tried to force himself on me. When I refused, when I fought him, he beat me with his fists. He said I needed to learn obedience. He said I was his property now, and I would do as I was told. The crowd stirred, some people gasping, others muttering angrily. Tala pulled down the shoulder of her dress, revealing the bandaged wound. 4 nights ago, he was drunk on whiskey. He was angry because I would not submit to him. He took the iron poker from beside the fireplace and struck me here, on my shoulder. The pain was so great that I could not stand. I fell to the floor, and he laughed. Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice remained steady. He dragged me to the bedroom. He tied my hands to the bedpost with rope. He said I would never leave him, that I would die in that house, and no one would care because I was just an Apache woman. She held up her wrists, showing the rope burns to the crowd. I waited until he fell asleep. Then I chewed through the rope with my teeth. It took a long time. My mouth bled, but I had to escape. I had to run. She looked around at the faces in the crowd, willing them to understand. I could not go to the reservation. The soldiers would find me and bring me back. I could not go to anyone in this town. No one would believe an Apache woman over a major in the army, so I ran to the only person I thought might help me, Caleb Stone. She pointed to Caleb, her hand steady. 5 months ago, before the major took me, I was lost in the forest collecting herbs. Caleb Stone found me. He did not ask who I was. He did not touch me. He spoke to me in my language. He showed me the way home. He treated me with respect, as a person, not as property. Her voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. When I came to his cabin 4 days ago, I was bleeding. I was sick with fever. I thought I was going to die. He cleaned my wound. He gave me water and medicine. When the fever made me crazy, when I fought him and scratched him because I thought he was the major, he did not hurt me. He only tried to keep me safe. She stood up from the chair, swaying slightly, and raised her voice so everyone could hear. Caleb Stone did not kidnap me. He did not hurt me. He saved my life. And if you hang him, you are killing an innocent man to protect a monster. The silence that followed was absolute and profound. Not a single person moved. Not a single person spoke. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Then Major Blackwood exploded with rage. "Lies," he roared, his face purple, spittle flying from his lips. "All lies. You are confused. You are sick. You do not know what you are saying." He lunged toward Tala, moving faster than anyone expected. His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, the one with the rope burns, and he squeezed hard. Tala screamed, a sound of pure agony. Blood began to seep through the bandages where his fingers dug into the healing wounds. "You belong to me," the major shouted, shaking her. "You are my wife. You will obey me." That was when everything changed. Dr. Reeves shouted, "Let her go," and rushed forward, grabbing the major's arm. Reverend Ashford followed, his face pale with shock and horror. Within seconds, 6 men had pulled Major Blackwood away from Tala, holding him back as he struggled and cursed and tried to break free. "She is mine," he bellowed, his voice raw. "I have the right. The law gives me the right. She is my wife, and I can do whatever I want with her." The crowd recoiled from him, finally seeing what they should have seen all along. This was not a man protecting his wife. This was a man claiming ownership of another human being. This was not love or marriage. This was slavery and brutality. Reverend Samuel Ashford, who had until this moment believed every word Major Blackwood had said, now looked at him with something close to horror. "No man has the right to hurt another person like this," the Reverend said, his voice shaking. "This is not marriage. This is not discipline. This is cruelty. This is evil." Mayor Whitmore, his face ashen, his hands trembling, looked around at the crowd and saw that the tide had finally irreversibly turned. He cleared his throat and spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I think, I think we need to hear more before we proceed with any judgment. But Dr. Reeves was not finished. He reached into his medical bag and pulled out 3 manila folders, each one worn and yellowed with age. He held them up for everyone to see. These are medical records, he announced, his voice rising above the noise. 3 women who were connected to Major Marcus Blackwood. 3 women who are now dead or missing. He opened the first folder, reading from the papers inside. Margaret Blackwood, the Major's first wife. She died 6 years ago in the summer of 1873. The official cause of death was a fall from a horse while riding alone on the trail north of town. But the physician who examined her body, Dr. William Howard, now retired and living in Tucson, wrote in his private notes that the skull fracture was inconsistent with a fall from a horse. The angle was wrong. The severity was wrong. He suspected that she had been struck with a heavy object. He tried to request an investigation, but Major Blackwood refused to allow it, claiming it would be disrespectful to his wife's memory. The crowd murmured, the sound like distant thunder. Dr. Reeves opened the second folder. Sonny, Apache woman, age 22. She lived with Major Blackwood for 6 months 3 years ago, from January to July of 1876. In July, she disappeared. Her body was never found. The Major claims she ran away in the night, back to the reservation. But there is a report here from an Apache woman named Nasha, who stated that she saw Sonny 2 days before her disappearance. Sonny had bruises on her face and arms. She was crying. She said the Major beat her whenever she displeased him. The murmuring grew louder, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Dr. Reeves opened the third folder, his hands shaking now, his voice thick with emotion. Huyana, Apache woman, age 19. She died 18 months ago in March of 1878. The official cause of death was suicide by strychnine poisoning. Self-administered, but I examined her body myself. I saw bruises on her neck, here and here. He gestured to his own neck. They were finger-shaped bruises, consistent with strangulation. And when I searched the Major's house for the strychnine, I found none. There was no rat poison, no agricultural chemicals, nothing that contained strychnine. So where did it come from? He looked around at the crowd, his eyes blazing. I wrote my concerns in my notes. I suggested to the marshal that we investigate further. But Marshal Thompson said the Major was a respected man, a hero of the Apache campaigns, and that we should not sully his reputation with unfounded accusations. So the case was closed. Huyana was buried in the pauper cemetery outside town, and everyone forgot about her. Reeves closed the folders and held them against his chest. Major Blackwood is not a victim. He is not a hero. He is a man who has hurt and killed multiple women, and he has done it for years while we all looked the other way because we did not want to believe that a man in a uniform could be a monster. The crowd erupted into chaos. People shouted accusations, demanded answers, argued with each other about what should be done. Some still defended the Major, saying the doctor was lying or mistaken. But many more, perhaps the majority, were beginning to see the truth. And then one more voice joined the fray, a voice that no one had expected to hear. Dr. Reeves is telling the truth. I can confirm it. A young man in a cavalry uniform stepped forward from where he had been standing with the other soldiers. It was Lieutenant Owen Fletcher, the Major's second in command at Fort Verde, a man of 30 years with sandy blonde hair and a face that looked much younger than his age. He was pale, his hands shaking, but his voice was clear and steady. My name is Lieutenant Owen Fletcher. I have served under Major Blackwood for 3 years, and I have seen things that I should have reported long ago, but I was too afraid. The crowd turned to stare at him. Major Blackwood's eyes went wide with alarm and fury. Lieutenant Fletcher, the Major snarled, you will return to your post immediately. That is an order. But Fletcher shook his head. No, sir, I cannot. Not anymore. Not. He stepped closer to the courthouse, addressing the crowd directly. Major Blackwood ordered me to help him cover up Huyana's death. He told me to write in the official report that she had committed suicide, that she had been despondent and unstable. But I saw her body before anyone else did, before the doctor arrived. There were bruises on her neck. Not faint bruises, deep, dark bruises in the exact shape of fingers and thumbs. She did not kill herself, she was strangled. The crowd gasped. Several women began to cry. Fletcher's voice broke, but he pushed on. I said nothing at the time. The major told me that if I spoke out, he would have me court-martialed for insubordination and dishonor. He said he would ruin my career, destroy my family's name. I was afraid. So I wrote the false report, and I have carried that guilt with me every day since. He looked at Tala, tears streaming down his face. I am sorry, I should have spoken sooner. I should have protected you. I should have stopped him before he could hurt anyone else. I failed you, and I failed Huyana, and I failed every woman he has ever hurt. I cannot change the past, but I can tell the truth now. The silence that followed was so deep and heavy that it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. Mayor Whitmore stood on the courthouse steps, his face gray, his body swaying slightly as if he might faint. He looked at Major Blackwood, then at Dr. Reeves, then at Lieutenant Fletcher, then at Tala. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse and barely audible. Major Marcus Blackwood, in light of these testimonies and the evidence presented, I am ordering your immediate arrest. You will be held in custody until a proper judge can be brought from Phoenix to conduct a full and legal trial. Major Blackwood's face contorted with rage and disbelief. You cannot do this. I am a major in the United States Army. You have no authority over me. I demand that you release me at once. I have every authority granted to me by the territorial government, the mayor said, his voice gaining strength. And if you resist, these men will use whatever force is necessary to subdue you. 10 men stepped forward, their rifles raised, their faces grim and determined. They were not soldiers. They were townspeople, ranchers, shopkeepers, blacksmiths, ordinary men who had finally decided that enough was enough. Major Blackwood looked around, searching desperately for allies, for anyone who would stand with him. But even his own soldiers had backed away, unwilling to defend him now that the truth had come out. Slowly, with the air of a man who has been betrayed by the entire world, Major Blackwood raised his hands in surrender. His face was twisted with hatred, but he did not resist as 2 men moved forward to bind his wrists. As they led him toward the jail, the major turned back one final time, his eyes locking onto Tala with a gaze so full of venom that several people stepped back in fear. You will regret this, he said, his voice low and deadly. You and Stone both. I will find a way. I always do. You have not won. This is not over. Tala met his gaze without flinching. For the first time in 4 months, she was not afraid of him. You have no power over me anymore, she said. I am free. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Major Marcus Blackwood was dragged away, his pristine uniform now torn and dirty, his medals hanging askew, his pride shattered beyond repair. When he was gone, Mayor Whitmore turned to the men holding Caleb. His voice was quiet but firm. Cut him loose. The ropes fell away and Caleb stood, rubbing his wrists where the hemp had cut deep grooves into his skin. Blood dripped from the wounds, but he did not seem to notice. He looked around at the crowd, at the faces of the people who had been ready to hang him just minutes before, and he said nothing. There was nothing to say. He walked slowly toward where Tala sat, still pale and trembling in her chair. He knelt beside her, his voice low, speaking in Apache so that only she could hear. Are you all right? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Because of you. Because you were brave enough to let them hurt you instead of letting them take me back to him. Caleb reached out and gently touched her hand, just for a moment. You were the brave one. I just gave you a place to rest. Director Reeves approached, his medical bag in hand. We need to get her back to my office. She needs proper rest and care. Her wounds are not fully healed, and the stress of today has taken a toll. Caleb nodded and stepped back, allowing the doctor to take over. But before the soldiers lifted her chair to carry her away, Tala reached out and caught Caleb's hand, holding it tightly. Stay, she whispered. Please do not leave yet. I will stay, Caleb promised, until I know you are safe. As Tala was carried away toward Dr. Reeves' office, the crowd began to disperse, people walking away in small groups, talking in hushed voices about everything they had witnessed. Some were ashamed, some were angry, some were simply confused, trying to reconcile what they had believed with what they now knew to be true. Caleb Stone stood alone in the center of the square, the rope marks still fresh on his wrists, his face swollen and bruised. No one approached him. No one apologized. They simply walked past him, unable or unwilling to meet his eyes. He did not expect an apology. He had lived too long to expect much from people. After a few minutes, he turned and walked toward Dr. Reeves' office, following the path that Tala had taken. He had promised to stay, and he would keep that promise. Behind him, the sun climbed higher into the sky, and the town of Crimson Bluff tried to return to normal, even though everyone knew that nothing would ever be quite the same again.